All right. There we go. So we should be live on all three places now. All right. Perfect. Thanks, Spencer. Benari, great to see y'all. Eduardo Trade. Good afternoon, guys. I hope y'all had a good trading day. Thank you, OKJ. OKG is probably how you pronounce it. Apologize. I was having some trouble with my webcam, so I was going to try and I know I was supposed to try and be on for the webcam, so I do apologize about that you guys can't see my face. Maybe that's a bit better, right? But good afternoon, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on this scanner session. So I talked about this some on my Sunday review. I know I talked about it as well earlier last week, as well as on the free webinar last Wednesday. But I wanted to start doing a scanner session with you guys because for those of you who know about the true low indicator, let me pull up SPX here. But this is an indicator that has really been helping me out quite a bit in this market. Overall, it's helped me stay out of trades that I don't necessarily want to be in, right? It's helped time those perfect entries. And so I know currently in this pullback, right, we've had a lot of questions on, is this the bounce up? Is this the time to buy? Is this the best discount price? And on the weekly time frame, this is where at this point I am personally been trying to look for a true low to pop up, because the last time it popped up on the weekly time frame was during the pandemic pullback, right? During the lows of that. And then of course that allowed for a beautiful run to the upside. And it doesn't print very often, right? It's not meant to. If you see it start printing quite a bit on the daily chart, that's usually a sign a bigger pullback's coming and you need to look at a longer time frame. And so that's what I've been keeping my eye on, is for the weekly chart. And for those of you who have been following along with me, y'all know that a few weeks ago, back on this bar here on February 21st, whenever the low was at around 41.14 for the week, we actually started to see a true low print. And it started printing. It was trying to do the cherry on top even, like we've seen back here during the low of this pullback. But we got so much of a bounce up into the close of that week that the signal ended up disappearing, right? So that discount price that was starting to print down here closer to 4,200, right? It wasn't as much of a discount anymore up here. Then last week, we started to see a similar setup where at the lows, right, we started to see the true low try and appear. It was trying to print, and it actually stayed valid right up into that 10 period simple. And then once we start to break that, once we start to break above 4,400, that's unfortunately when the signal started to disappear. So my first clue here is, okay, maybe it's not necessarily going to print on SPX for the weekly chart like I'd like to see, but perhaps it's trying to clue me in now for a potential discount buy here. When we go into the Qs, right, NDX and the Qs, this too has been trying to print the true low setup, and it's actually printed here, right? So here's the true low indicator that's been printing. Once again, the last time we saw it was during the pandemic pullback. Then we had these two lows. All of these would have been a great place to buy in, both for the shorter term run as well as the bigger picture point of view. So we finally start to see that on the Qs on the weekly chart, and we're also starting to see it appear on IWM and of course RUT, right? This one has also been trying to print the true lows recently, and then the last cluster it had it on once again was right around these pandemic lows before that run up. So we've started to see it print on the other indexes. I would have liked to see it print on SPX, but unfortunately, right, it hasn't quite printed yet. However, if, right, they were trying to print and maybe we don't get it to print, but this is technically the discount buy, right? This is the quote unquote low area. Then I want to start looking for some symbols that are also printing true lows on maybe some of their longer time frames, or potentially in the scanner session, go through some symbols and sectors of the market that are holding up a bit better, right? That might be able to hold up even if the market is still not done with this pullback and we end up reversing back down to 4,200, which I wouldn't mind, right? Because if we pull back down to 4,200 and that holds support, that definitely for me is a tell in, okay, let's try and buy that to play back up towards 4,400, if not higher, right? So let's go back to the daily chart here. One of the ones that was on my list, I actually had this up on the webinar for those of you who watched last Wednesday's webinar going over the true low. Then this picture might look familiar to you, USO, or of course in turn CL for my futures folks who trade crude. Both of these were actually starting to give true low signals recently. So I mentioned, hey, right, tried to point out, point out on the webinar for y'all. 1 second. Apologize, been talking a lot today. So I tried to mention in the webinar, like, hey guys, this might actually be the discount buy range before the next pop. You can see that's already starting to occur. So if you were following along last Wednesday, or you've been following along with me in the rooms, CLUSO, if you're like, man, how was I supposed to know that this pop was going to happen, right? How was I supposed to know if this could occur? Well, the true low was giving you that, right? That indication that, hey, this might be the discount buy-in spot for this next run up. And if you're in this, well done. My target for USO, for example, would probably be up here on 85. And of course, if that starts to break, then you know that you can start to play for a bigger trend run to the upside. So well done if you caught that. Still, there's some room to play to the upside if you want to, but it's definitely not near that discount price anymore. So let's keep going. NVDA is actually one that's been on my list for a little bit. Let's talk about that. So here, this one, I'd watch it because it started to print on the daily chart some, and it's starting to definitely print on the weekly chart, which is where I like this setup. But this in particular is what I'd watch, guys. So watch and see how on the daily chart the price acts around the 100 period simple. If we start to break above and hold that as support, to me, that's a good sign that the weekly setup is trying to follow through, right? Here are the true lows that we've been seeing on the weekly. They've been right in line with that support. On the weekly chart, we haven't seen the Bollinger Bands try to flare open at all. So that's a really good sign for us to consider buying in. Of course, we are starting to get a squeeze building up. We're starting to get the bullish signal on the compound breakout tool. Notice how both of these things started printing right before the true low setup. That's what I find, can happen sometimes is you'll get the true low as the very first clue that this is the discount buy. And then you'll slowly get the other indicators to start being in agreement with it as the move starts to happen, right? So if we can break above that daily resistance level that we're kind of stuck at now, that leaves a lot of room to play this up towards 300, 325, and potentially, right, play for the next trend itself. If daily resistance holds though, and this starts to pull back, but we still main holding certainly 200, if not the 220 range, right? If we can still maintain above 220 as support, then that's just going to give us a better spot to buy in at, to then play it back up towards 250, if not higher. So this I wanted to put on my watch list for this week because in the scanner session, because I really do like this weekly setup. It's one I've been eyeing for the last couple weeks. For those of you who know, right, this is one I've been keeping my eye on. And it's starting to get a nice bounce up again, but it really depends, of course, on this first level of resistance, right? Are we going to be able to break above it and keep with the trend, or are we going to have one more pullback first before maybe we try again? So that's what I'd be watching on NVDA. Google's another one that I want to pop up here, which is in a similar situation to NVDA. It's at or very near daily resistance, right? It's another one where we've been getting the true low indicators down here at the bottoms before these bounces to the upside into resistance levels. So we had another one that print here. We're bouncing up into resistance. It was your clue that if you're short, protect profits. And certainly the main resistance up here is at 2,800. So there's a little bit more room to play this to the upside currently. But the weekly chart in particular, once again, is where I've been eyeing this because, I mean, even as you can see here, before I even zoom in, this is running slow. There we go. Before I even zoom in, you can see here, right? Google doesn't print this indicator very often, especially on the weekly time frame. And when you get it, it's usually at a good buy-in price, whether it's for a shorter term trend move, right? Or for the bigger picture price move overall. All of these have been really good spots to buy in at. And we got this signal to print once again a couple weeks ago. It's holding up quite nicely, right? It's holding support. And of course, on Google, we know that there's a stock split coming, right? And on stock splits going into that announcement, a lot of times you will see a run up in the price. So the idea, of course, is that we will get some sort of run up potentially into that announcement, which happens in July, I believe, is when Google happens, and Amazon happens in June. Um, so if that's the case, right, this might be a really good place to discount buy for the share for the run up into the announcement. It could be, just not a bad place to buy in general for an options trade idea like a broken wing butterfly. Once again, 2800 is going to be that first level to go up and test. So if you're like trying to play catch up here on this move back when the true low was printing around 2600 or so, right? I would just make that my first target. So let me pull up the option chain actually, where trying to find my mouse. There it is. It's like going so slow. There we are. Let me pull up the option chain. So on Google, for example, what you could look to do if you didn't want to just July 1st, thanks Deepak, I appreciate that. So July 1st is when the Google split is. So if you wanted to play a run up for that, right, one way to do it, and you could even build some time into this trade, right, go out to like the April monthly. But what I would first consider doing is something, just like a broken wing butterfly at that 2800 level. And you can make this as wide or as narrow as a spread as you want to. And you can also bring this in if you think the test to 2800 is going to happen sooner, because of course Google's a very volatile symbol. But the idea is, because that's our next target, right? You take something like a broken wing butterfly, keep it rather inexpensive, but then play for that next point, right, of 2800, that next level, if you will, to play up into. So this trade idea is a 275 cost basis. If you get the pin to happen going into the close of expiration, it would allow for a 1725 profit potential. But let's say it gets up to 2800 next week and then completely goes past that on its way back up to 3000. Well, the broken wing butterfly, with the way it's set up here, where the debit spread is wider than the credit spread, would still actually allow for a 225 profit, even if it goes completely in the money, right? So it has that slight forgiveness factor there. If it really takes off without you, right? If these squeezes start to fire that we're seeing here and it just pops, shoots for the moon, it still allows for that profit. If you get just the move up into that level for the pin, it allows for a great profit. And at the same time, it keeps our capital costs very controlled. So instead of coming out here to try and buy an out of the money long call for, $4,700, we're doing so for a small fraction of the price and still giving ourselves that bullish sentiment to the upside. So, you know, trades like that is what you could consider here for Google, but certainly this is one I've been eyeing for my kids' account because I want to buy in. And so I'm, kind of looking at that myself here. KMI is up next. So KMI is actually printed some on the weekly chart not too long ago. So we'll start here. So we had some true lows on the weekly chart that printed a while ago. It looks like we're trying to build up here with the bullish sentiment with the squeeze. When we go to the daily chart also had some recent true lows. Right here is the daily time frame in particular. There's the true low lining up there. The cherry on top was the bottom of that pullback. Here's the one back here for this run. There's the one there for that run up. So it looks like it's starting to go, right? I would, however, be mindful that KMI is one of those symbols that can chop. So my first target would, of course, be the prior highs, right around 19. If you see the price stalling at all up there, just take the quick win, right? Because like I said, KMI is no stranger to chopping. And then if it starts to see the Bollinger Bands open up, right, if we get a little bit more of that bullish sentiment overall, then you can try and play for the trend move higher. The KMI is another one to keep your eye out for. CTRA is next. So CTRA, this is another one we'll zoom in on. So just, to go back, we had some true lows printing during this consolidation. Usually it was at the bottom of the range when it printed in this overall chop. Then you had a little bit more of a pullback. You had right here on the very bottom of that pullback, right? The drop, if you will, the lowest low. That's where the cherry on top printed for that overall bounce higher. Here as well. Now, this one wasn't technically at the bottom because of earnings, but similar situation where it was giving you a little clue that you might buy in prior to the announcement, or even if you bought in on the lows of that announcement, well done, because you had that nice rip to the upside. And then we've pulled back and now we've printed another one right here. So we're starting to bounce back up. So similar situation, it's starting to bounce. You could play it up towards 27, 28. If it starts stalling there, if the Bollinger Bands remain flat, just take the quick win. But if we start to see these open up, especially with the squeeze that's starting to build, right, with momentum being so low, you know that this could see the next run to the upside. It's also energy, right? Energy's been doing a bit better overall in the market compared to something else, as compared to some of the other sectors. So certainly one to consider. Helen, yeah. So when I see like quite a bit happening, right? Because the idea is the true low isn't supposed to print very often. It's supposed to help find you those discount buy-ins. So if all of a sudden I'm like seeing a whole bunch of true lows print on a daily chart, one, more than likely that trend is turning bearish, right? So I need to be mindful of that. And these are things that I teach about in the class. But two, it's also a clue to maybe look at the weekly or monthly time frame, because it could be telling me that a bigger discount buy is on the way. Like, for example, with SPX. Let's go back to that one. So SPX, right, when we take a big picture look, all last year, especially in the bullish trend, you didn't see that indicator print very often, right? And when it did, it was usually a good buy-in for either the shorter term run or the overall big picture view from what we saw, right? Now, more recently, we've started to see it print a bit more. And that's our clue that one, the market's probably turning bearish, which it is. And two, when it prints and those Bollinger Bands flatten out, it's usually your clue to say, hey, this is probably a place to protect yourself on the short side, right? If you're a bearish, take your profits. And if you want to play a counter, look to play for a bounce up at least into resistance, right? So here, right, Bollinger Band started to flatten out when you got the signal. You bounced up into resistance. Notice how it stopped printing. And then we pulled back, resistance held. We kept selling. Here as well, you got that to print with the cherry on top. You had the reversal back up into the 30 this time. That held. You played it back down. And then last week, right at the start of last week, actually, I think that might have been the Friday. Was it the 14th? Yeah, 14th and 15th, right? So last week, you started to get that signal print, and then you've had this bounce up. And if it starts to break resistance, then that's also your clue that the trend is coming back in. So we had that starting to print, right? So it was quite a bit. So that's why if you've been listening to me in the simpler trading rooms at all, I've been like, guys, I'm waiting for this on the weekly chart, right? I really want to see this pop up. And we have been, right? We've seen it flip on and off about the last month. So we know that this potentially is the discount buy-in price. It just might not be getting the print because we bounce up too much into the close at the end of the week. But it's certainly something I'm keeping an eye on. So I hope that helps answer that question, Helen. And Mark Philly, yeah, so it works out pretty well with the divergent bar. Keep in mind, though, the divergent bar is supposed to be for a short-term play, right? You're looking for that move of a higher high or lower low to happen within 3 bars, whereas the true low is supposed to help be the discount, right? That big discount. But of course, if you get a bullish divergent bar when you're getting a true low, right? It's like it makes for a sweeter deal, that's for sure. Um, so I hope that answers that question. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to answer questions here while we're going through the scans. And Esther, yes. So great question. She's asking about the time frames that I use. Currently in this market, I've been leaning more towards daily, weekly, sometimes even monthly true low setups when there's like a really good like deal of a discount price there. I'll be looking at it on the monthly. When it's in a bit more of a normal bullish market environment, so like last year, for example, when the overall market was bullish, I usually was leaning on this more towards the 4 hour and the daily chart. And then if I had the weekly setup like we did in Apple last year, especially when it's an agreement with the daily, it's like, oh yeah, I'm definitely jumping in now. So I usually don't do it under anything less than the 4 hour though. I feel like the 4 hour is like a good sweet spot for the intraday lower time frames. NEM is the next one that I wanted to pop up here. So this one, of course, has had pretty good discount buy-ins on the longer term, right? It was trying to give you that discount on the weekly chart before this run up, but we have had it print recently on the daily chart. So here it was back here, right? This is when it was in line with the weekly time frame. You had it print one more time on the daily before it started to really run back to the upside and break out of that consolidation. You had it print once more here before this run up. And then we've had it print Friday, right? So Friday, we actually got one with the cherry on top. Notice what's happening with the Bollinger Bands, guys. The Bollinger Bands are already starting to flare open. So that's, of course, our clue that if this is flaring open and the price is way down here, it's already anticipating for that potential run higher and it's making room for it. So that's a really good sign when Bollinger Bands are flaring open like this, right? And that bullish sentiment, and we had a true low, that this is probably going to move to the upside. Now, we do have prior price resistance levels at 77.50 and around 80. So you do want to be mindful of that. But obviously, if we can start to break this level tomorrow, right, play it up into 80. If we really start to break 80, keep playing for the trend. It looks great. Momentum has plenty of room to keep moving higher there. Up next is HOLX. And Carol, yeah, we could certainly look to buy in if it starts to break resistance. Personally, what I would do is play up just into the next level, right? So you're just playing it for that slight place higher. Eduardo, thanks for the subscription. I appreciate that. So HOLX here. So this one also had the true low setup. We can see it starting to break the 100, which is what I like, right? I never really like trading anything below the 100. I usually play up into that level, and then once it breaks, it's my clue to keep going. You have a squeeze printing, you have momentum starting to turn up, and then on the weekly, and of course even the monthly time frame, you can tell over there, right? We have squeezes. So on the weekly chart, this has been building up with some true lows as we've been consolidating. As long as this keeps holding the 100, right? One, play this up into the ATR trailing stop. But two, if we break this level, right? Because notice the wedge pattern that's happening. We are seeing this hold as resistance. We're seeing the 100 hold as support. So if we can break to the upside, which is what I would be inclined to think happens here because I'm getting a whole bunch of discount prices, right? I had a nice squeeze building up. So if we break this $80 price level, or certainly break the highs of 85, right? You play that trend higher. That doesn't look bad. And we saw this actually not too long ago on HOLX back here, right? You had like a cluster of true lows starting to print during this consolidation. And overall, right, that moved to the upside. You had the pandemic lows where it printed. And then, of course, if you held through the lows or if you bought there, that obviously saw a really nice move higher too. So HOLX, MAA. And Helen, this is all stuff from the scanner. So let me pop it over. I did this prior though, so that way, we could actually have a nice list together of trade ideas for y'all. But I'll show you the scanner right now. Let me load it up. I was actually on a different scan right before the close. So there's a bunch of different ways, obviously, you can scan for this and set up the scan. What I like to do, because the true low indicator, I mean, it's great when you can jump in on it, the actual cherry on top itself. But the thing I like about this indicator is you don't necessarily need to get in right when it prints, right? Because the idea is you're looking for the overall discount. So sometimes, you have plenty of time to jump in for that run higher. And so usually I look for it within 5 bars of printing. So that's how I currently have my scan up, is I'm looking for a true low, ideally with the cherry on top, within 5 bars of the current bar. So that's what I did for this scan. And I went through different sectors and things like that. And that's how I found these. MA, it doesn't have one on the weekly chart. It's setting up for a very nice squeeze though, but it is printing a true low on the daily chart. Once again, right? The idea is that this indicator doesn't print all the time. It's not supposed to identify every low. It's supposed to help identify the discount price, right? The best deal. And so what we've been getting here recently on MA is we've been starting to get this cluster, right? But we're not really going into a bearish trend, which is a good sign for us if we're trying to be bullish on this, right? It's just basically been more in chop. So I do want to see this hold 200. If it can't hold 200, then, it might be one that stays on the watch list. But if it can hold the $200 price level, the last time we kind of saw this happen, right, with the true low, was back here during this consolidation. And what happened once we broke out of the consolidation, we had a great run to the upside. So this one's a little bit different because it's not trading above the 100 like this one is, right? We're trading at the 100. So that's why, keep an eye on it. But that weekly squeeze is looking great. So if the daily can keep holding 200, the idea is that these squeezes will fire to the upside. So that's MAA. And the true lows, Peter, they work on to the 4-hour chart. I've used it every now and then on the 1-hour chart, but I really prefer that only in more bullish market environments. The 4-hour, I think, is the sweet spot, 4-hour and higher. And sometimes when you get it on the 4-hour entry, it can still make for an intraday move. Like I've had it happen where I've jumped into things like on Google and on Tesla when they're printing the 4-hour true low. And I've been able to profit recycle it and lock in the profit within the same day because the move is just happening already in that time frame, right? Within that day. So sometimes you can, still take the quick profit. EMN is up next. I'm going to have to go soon, guys. So let me try and get through the rest of my list here for y'all. But ENM, this one is slowly starting to see the Bollinger Bands flatten out, which is what you want to see when you're printing true lows like this and the Bollinger Bands are flaring open. You want to wait for them to flatten out. That's usually the best discount price. And on the weekly chart, we've also started to get true lows here, right in line with support, which is very nice. So if support can hold, right, play it back up into those price levels. If we start to break that, then you play for the trend itself. And then PANW. So PANW is also another one where it doesn't necessarily have it on the weekly chart. Really great squeeze setup though. Bollinger Bands are starting to flare open and you've had it on the daily chart. So here it is on the daily chart, right? Once again, if you had the indicator right and you bought in right there, it already made for probably a nice profit for you. But with how that weekly squeeze is setting up and everything else, I think this could be a good setup for a bigger trend move overall. So it's definitely one I'd be keeping on my watch list here. SU. I have like 3 more guys, so I'm trying to go a little bit quicker. Oh, this one really started to move today. I had this on I made this list a little bit earlier today, so you can see, right? It's already starting to happen, but here's the true low. Still has the squeeze, so you still might find a chance to hop in there. You have the bullish sentiment, you have the momentum picking up. Notice once again how both the squeeze and the compound breakout tool started to print after you first started to get the signal here. Bollinger Bands are starting to open up, right? So prior highs you want to be cautious of around 33.50, but otherwise, right, that looks like a good buy last time we saw that. Had a nice overall trend move higher. And then WMB. And Peter, my entry signal is usually either on the true low, right? Or if the Bollinger Bands are flaring open, then I wait for the Bollinger Bands to flatten out. And if that is still in line with the true low, like here, for example, then that's my clue to jump in. And play it for the upside. So here, for example, Bollinger Bands aren't flaring open. So that's already my clue that I could jump in immediately when that signal is starting to print. But like I said, sometimes, like even now, right, this is still viable to jump into to play back up into the highs here, if not for the trend itself, right? So it's not necessarily jumping on the day that it prints, but I still think there's obviously room to set up here and go. And that's WMB, that's the daily chart. And the weekly added a little while ago for that print, but see that overall is still going up nicely. MGY, sorry guys, I had to cough really quickly. MGY. So here's the weekly. Once again, great squeeze setting up. You actually have the true low print back here. Still a bit of room on momentum. When we go to the daily time frame, recent true low here, right off the 100 too. Nice spot. Nice bounce up. Bollinger Bands are starting to open up. It did make a bearish divergent bar today, so watch this. If we pull back and hold support, I still like the entry here. I still like the squeeze. I like everything else about my indicators. So ideally, right, we actually get a little bit of a pullback tomorrow, and then we could play for the daily weekly squeeze off this overall discount price higher for the next run. And then last but not least on my list was ENLC. And guys, for those of you that are in the simpler community, these are all different from my weekly watch list I did. All true low setups, but it is a different list. And then so here's ENLC. Right, some recent true lows. Bollinger Bands aren't flaring open, so that's already your clue that you can look at jumping in here. Obviously this is priced pretty inexpensive, but you could play it up into those levels. I tried to do a wide range of different symbols and what their value is, right, depending on how you like to trade things. But here as well, we finally have broken back up above the 100, so that's our first good clue. You had some true lows print there for that run up. Obviously, still not a bad place to buy in shares. And then you had this true low here for the current run up that we're in now. But those are some of the symbols, guys. So take a look at those, right? See if there's some trade ideas that you might want to consider. You have big names out there like NVDA, like Google. You have some smaller names out there, but a wide list and range of things to consider. So yeah, hopefully that helps you guys out with some trade ideas. I would go through a bit more of the scanner with y'all, but unfortunately that is my time. I do have to step off just because I have another meeting popping up. But I'd be happy to answer any last minute questions that you guys may have. So please let me know within the chat and I'd be happy to go over that. Thanks, Lorna. Appreciate it. Yeah, Frank, absolutely. And Peter, it's a few different indicators that create the true low. It's a combination of, and I really did the digging in this, mind you. So it's not the default by any means. Like I was in and out of this because I was like, there is a way I got to erase all these false signals and make it nice. But it's a combination of the MACD histogram, the stochastic full, the RSI, and the divergent bar. So it combines a whole bunch of things into it. And then I went into the internals and I really scraped it a whole bunch. I was like, nope, not using this. Nope, don't need this, right? And I took out all the false signals I could possibly take out. And what was left over was the true low signal. So that way it's not necessarily printing on every cell, right? I know when I pair it with the bullet. So here, for example, this is exactly what I mean, where if you get this signal to print, your trend's bearish. You wait for the Bollinger Bands to flatten out. They started to flatten out a little here, but notice how it wasn't really printing there. You sold off a bit more, then they started to flatten out. You got the confirmation here when it remained flat. So this was your clue that this was the good discount buy-in, right? Right around $2. Like that's not obvious. And then you play for the bounce. Can't go much lower than 2, right? But yeah, so that's what it's combined of. It's a whole bunch of things, all the internals. And where can you see the watch list? I have it written down. I'll post it in the chat. And certainly feel free to rewatch the video or here, I guess what I can do. Let me find my notepad. But I'll type it up now, and then that way it's saved on the video, so you guys can always just take a look at the video. So it was, I'll move this over. But on my list for today, we talked about USO and CL, right? Those are kind of one and the same, depending on if you're doing futures or not. NVDA, Google, KMI, CTRA, NEM, HOLX, MAA, EMN, PANW, SU, WMB, MGY and ENCL. And guys, make sure, right? We talked about on some of these, like NVDA, for example, right near daily resistance. So you either want the pullback first for the entry or you want to confirm your breaking resistance. So please feel free to go back, watch this video a couple times just to make sure, you're getting the right levels and the things that I'm looking for. But those are all the ones that are either printing true lows on the daily or weekly charts, or they have recently, where the setup still looks good overall. Polly, yeah, I'm surprised it's not in there. It should be in there. So it will definitely be added, my scanner, the one that I personally use for it. Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure that gets in there, guys. But thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great rest of your trading day if you're out there trading futures. As always, my fellow Jedis, may the trade be with you. And if you guys want more information around the true low indicator itself, please feel free to join me on Wednesday night. I'll be hosting another free webinar around it. Dive into the details. I'll show you some trade examples, how I'd like to use it. Hopefully, right, maybe some of the charts, like the USO one for last week, right, that was setting up when I was showing it, and now it's starting to work. So maybe we can find a few more of those for Wednesday. But yeah, guys, have a wonderful night, and I look forward to talking to y'all next time. Bye.